In November 2021, Zillow's CEO had to stand in front of investors and explain how his company just lost $381 million in a single quarter. But here's the crazy part. They weren't hacked, they didn't get sued, and there wasn't some massive scandal. They lost all that money because they tried to flip houses using an algorithm, and it went so spectacularly wrong that they had to fire 25% of their workforce right before the holidays. By the time the dust settled, the total damage would reach $881 million. This is the story of how one of the biggest names in real estate thought they could outsmart the housing market with artificial intelligence and ended up learning a very expensive lesson about why computers can't predict everything. Let's rewind to 2018. Zillow was already a household name. If you've ever looked for a house online, you've probably used their website to check out listings or see what your neighbor's house is worth. They were making money from advertising and connecting buyers with real estate agents, but their CEO, Rich Barton, wanted more. He looked at companies like Opendoor and OfferPad that were buying houses directly from homeowners, flipping them and making serious profits. Barton thought Zillow could do the same thing, but better, because they had something nobody else had: mountains of data and sophisticated algorithms that had been pricing homes for years. So in April 2018, Zillow launched a program called Zillow Offers in Phoenix. The pitch was simple. Homeowners could sell their house directly to Zillow in a matter of days, skip the hassle of listing it, and move on with their lives. Zillow would then do minor repairs, maybe slap on some fresh paint and resell it for a profit. They called it iBuying, and Wall Street loved the idea. Investors were excited because this wasn't just about connecting buyers and sellers anymore. This was Zillow actually getting into the transaction itself, which meant way bigger revenue potential. For the first couple of years, things looked promising. Zillow started in Phoenix, then expanded to Las Vegas, Atlanta, Charlotte, and eventually over 25 markets across the country. By 2019, they were buying hundreds of homes every month. The company's stock price was climbing, and analysts were writing glowing reports about how Zillow was revolutionizing real estate. Rich Barton would appear in interviews talking about how their algorithm could predict home prices more accurately because it was crunching data from millions of transactions. But there were warning signs that most people missed. Real estate professionals in these markets started noticing something odd. Zillow was sometimes paying prices that seemed aggressive for houses in certain neighborhoods. The company seemed confident that their data-driven approach gave them an edge that traditional buyers didn't have. They were betting everything on their algorithm's ability to predict where prices were headed. Then COVID hit in 2020, and the housing market went absolutely insane. Prices started climbing faster than anyone had predicted. Mortgage rates dropped to historic lows. Everyone wanted to leave the cities for suburban houses with home offices, and suddenly there weren't enough homes to go around. For Zillow, this seemed like the perfect opportunity. Their algorithm was predicting that prices would keep climbing, so they started buying houses even more aggressively. In the third quarter of 2021 alone, Zillow bought 9,680 homes. The problem was that their algorithm was trained on normal market conditions. It had data from steady markets, from recessions, from modest growth periods, but it had never seen anything like the pandemic housing boom. Nobody had. The algorithm was essentially driving blind, making predictions based on patterns that didn't exist anymore. And Zillow kept trusting it, pouring billions of dollars into inventory based on what a computer program said these houses would be worth in a few months. By the third quarter of 2021, Zillow owned 9,790 homes. That's a massive amount of real estate to have sitting on your books. They were the largest homeowner in some neighborhoods. But something was starting to go wrong behind the scenes. The houses they'd bought earlier in the year weren't selling as fast as the algorithm predicted. The repairs were taking longer than expected. Construction crews were backed up for months because everyone was trying to flip houses at the same time. And most importantly, the market was starting to shift. In October 2021, Zillow did something that shocked everyone. They announced they were pausing new home purchases because they had too much inventory. The official reason was operational issues. They couldn't keep up with all the repairs and renovations. But people in the industry started asking questions. If business was so good, why stop? A few analysts started digging into the numbers and realized that Zillow was sitting on thousands of houses that they'd overpaid for, and the market was changing just enough that they couldn't flip them for a profit anymore. November 2nd, 2021, that's when everything fell apart publicly. Zillow announced their third quarter earnings, and it was a bloodbath. They reported a loss of $381 million for the quarter from their home flipping segment. But the truly devastating news came next. They were shutting down Zillow Offers completely, not pausing it, not scaling it back, killing it entirely. And they were laying off 2,000 employees, which was 25% of their workforce. Rich Barton had to get on an earnings call and explain to investors how the company's big bet had failed so catastrophically. According to reports, he talked about how their pricing algorithm had become unreliable in the rapidly changing market conditions. He admitted they'd fundamentally misjudged where things were headed. One of the questions from analysts was obvious. How did your algorithm, which prices millions of homes on your website every day, get this so wrong? The answer was basically that pricing a home for informational purposes is very different from pricing it when you're actually buying it with real money. The stakes changed everything. Here's what had actually happened. Zillow's algorithm had predicted that home prices would keep rising through the end of 2021. Based on that prediction, they'd been paying premium prices for houses all summer and fall, expecting to sell them for even more. But the market didn't cooperate. In that same third quarter, while they bought 9,680 homes, they only sold 3,032. Prices plateaued in many markets, and in some cases started declining slightly. Suddenly, Zillow was stuck with thousands of houses that they'd paid too much for, and they couldn't sell them without taking massive losses. They'd essentially bought high and were being forced to sell low, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do when flipping houses. The numbers were brutal. According to reports, Zillow was losing an average of $80,771 per home they sold. They had to take a $304 million inventory write-down in that third quarter alone because the houses they owned were worth less than what they'd paid. And they still had about 7,000 homes they needed to unload somehow. By the time Zillow finished unwinding Zillow Offers in 2022, the total damage was staggering. For the full year of 2021, they reported losses of $881 million from the program. They had to sell off their entire inventory of homes, many of them at significant losses. The company that thought it could use technology to revolutionize home buying had just proven that some markets are too complex and unpredictable for even the smartest algorithms. The 2,000 employees who got laid off found out right before Thanksgiving 2021. According to news reports, many had been assured just weeks earlier that their jobs were secure, that Zillow Offers was the future of the company. Some had relocated their families to different cities specifically to work on this program. The timing was particularly brutal with the holidays approaching. For Rich Barton personally, this was his second stint as CEO of Zillow, and it was a devastating blow. He'd co-founded Expedia, he was seen as a visionary in tech, and he'd returned to Zillow specifically to lead this expansion into iBuying. The failure raised serious questions about whether tech companies really could disrupt traditional industries just by throwing algorithms and data at complex problems. The craziest part about the whole Zillow disaster is that they're still in business and actually doing okay now. They went back to their original model of running a real estate website and connecting people with agents, and their stock has recovered significantly since then. But Zillow Offers is dead and buried, a nearly billion-dollar lesson that sometimes the old way of doing things exists for a reason. Real estate agents, the people Zillow thought they could replace with an algorithm, are still out there pricing homes the traditional way. Here's my question for you. Do you think Zillow could have made this work if they'd been more conservative with their pricing? Or was the whole idea doomed from the start? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear about more spectacular business failures, hit that subscribe button because I've got plenty more stories like this one.